Like a Dragon Gaiden is not a terrible game, but I do think that it was a bit of a letdown. I've come to hold RGG in quite high regard over the years. The studio that develops the Yakuza games have always had a pretty high standard. They've had fumbles here and there, but most of their releases have great stories, tons of quality side content, and just a lot to do in general. In that regard, Like a Dragon Gaiden doesn't really feel like it's up to snuff. It doesn't match the heights of the other games in terms of narrative. Its story feels a bit out of place, even though its setting in the overall timeline is well established. It feels a bit unnecessary at points, and the tale is often interrupted by a lot of uninteresting filler. The plot often feels like it doesn't quite make sense within its own established rules. Certain characters aren't built up enough to be threatening or impactful, and the story just drags too much for a game that's so short. The Yakuza series has always been known for all of the stuff you can do outside of the main story, though. While this game does fit the bill by having two larger minigames, they don't really feel like they're much worth it in the grand scheme of things. Their gameplay is mostly grindy and unrewarding, and the game lacks a good volume of interesting sub-stories to keep your attention. There are bright moments, like the new and interesting fighting style that the game introduces. When the story isn't being interrupted, some unique characters are introduced, and the game manages to stick the landing with its ending. In fact, the ending is the brightest part of the game, showcasing a heartfelt and touching moment in the story that every fan of this series didn't know they wanted to see. Like a Dragon Gaiden becomes sort of a mixed bag, representing a much smaller spin-off project that was a bit too rushed to deliver much substantial. I don't think it's a bad game, but is it the most disappointing Yakuza game? Well, that's what I'm here to talk about today. I'll be taking a look at Like a Dragon Gaiden, talking about gameplay, mechanics, story, and everything in between. I have a ton of other videos on my channel covering the Yakuza series if you're interested in checking those out. Also, if you enjoy the video and want to support the channel, consider liking the video and subscribing, as it really helps me out. I also have a Patreon where I offer early access to my videos and exclusive content. Lately, I've been reviewing movies that are based on games, and I'm currently working on the Resident Evil films, so go check those out if you're inclined. Spoilers for a large portion of the Yakuza series. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Like a Dragon Gaiden. For the longest time, the Yakuza series focused on the story of one man, Kazuma Kiryu. There were games like Yakuza 0, 4, and 5 where other protagonists were introduced, but Kiryu being the main focus of the series mostly ended with Yakuza 6, The Song of Life. This game brought an end to Kiryu's saga, where he was forced to go into hiding after faking his death to protect the children he took care of at the Morning Glory Orphanage. The new focus of the series then became Ichiban Kasuga, the main protagonist of the new Yakuza games, which also saw the series shifting from the brawler action genre to turn-based RPGs. Kiryu appeared in Yakuza 7, or Yakuza Like a Dragon. During the finale, he showed up to help out with the dissolution of the Omi Alliance and the Tojo clan. It was then announced that Yakuza 8, or Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, would feature two protagonists, in that of Kiryu and Ichiban. After this was announced, Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, was also showcased. This game was meant to take place between the events of Yakuza 6 and Yakuza 7, focusing on Kiryu. Where was Kiryu during this time after faking his death? What was he doing? Where did he go? The game was also meant to be a brawler action title, much like the original Yakuza games were. The Yakuza series always tried to fill the hole of the action genre in the series after it switched to turn-based. They originally did this with the Judgment games, a spin-off series about detectives in Kamurocho, but after some disagreements with the talent agency representing the main star, that series seems to have been shelved. RGG needed to fill that brawler action hole once again, and so Gaiden very much feels like the replacement for that, at least in the short term. Gaiden began development after Yakuza 8 was already being worked on. Infinite Wealth was already in production when the team at RGG realized that some people might not be entirely up to speed on who Kiryu was if they started the series with Yakuza 7. This led them to start working on Gaiden at the same time as Infinite Wealth. Interestingly, Masayoshi Yokoyama, the director of the Yakuza series since Toshihiro Nagoshi's departure in 2021, gave an interview with Automaton where he talked about the division of labor when working on Yakuza games. He stated that there was really only one team working on multiple games. Certain people would be working on specific minigames, for example, and would be responsible for implementing that piece across both Gaiden and Infinite Wealth. This means that they were working on both of these games and the Ishin remake sort of all at the same time. Oftentimes, they would even be in the studio recording dialogue and would have to remind themselves which game they were working on. I note this because I think it's pretty important to the overall story here. RGG's output of games has been nothing short of impressive for many years now. They've released 9 mainline games, 9 spin-off games, and 3 full remakes since the start of the series. That's 21 games in 20 years. These games are not short either. Some of the more recent mainline entries can take around 50 hours just to complete the main story, let alone to see everything. Part of this is because of what we're talking about, that RGG takes an approach to game design that is not exactly orthodox. They work on multiple games at one time and have people stay consistent in their work across projects. Another part of this is the fact that RGG isn't afraid to reuse assets, sounds, and work from previous entries. In an interview with Gene Park of The Washington Post, Masayoshi Yokoyama stated, if you take a GTA or Assassin's Creed, those companies' big marketing copy is, oh, a new city with completely new gameplay, and they almost reinvent a large portion of the game. Most games these days aren't necessarily upgrades of the previous as much as they are complete reboots. And that ideology honestly leads to the Yakuza games feeling much more refreshing and consistent across the series. RGG doesn't try to reinvent the wheel every time they make a new game, they just work with what they already have. Gaiden was sort of a product of that work, only taking 6 months to develop during the development of another mainline game. The core of the story was meant to focus on what happened to Kiryu in between Yakuza 6 and 7, but the theme of the game was in the game's catchphrase used in marketing for the title. What do you have to lose to protect your loved ones? While we're on the subject of marketing, it's interesting to note that AEW, a popular wrestling promotion, promoted Like a Dragon Gaiden with a Yakuza street fight match between the Don Callis family and a tag team comprised of Chris Jericho, Kenny Omega, Paul White, and Kota Ibushi. Not really relevant to my overall point, but I thought it was interesting. Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name was released on November 9th, 2023 for the Sony PlayStation 4, Sony PlayStation 5, Microsoft Windows, the Xbox One, and Xbox Series systems. Like a Dragon Gaiden has a really odd intro. First of all, we're greeted with an absolutely beautiful main menu that shifts to different characters as you select different options. We then see footage of city streets as people are walking about, but this is maybe the first time ever in the series that we've seen live action footage being used for main cutscenes. It's not really a main cutscene though, because it's just an establishing shot for the city, but I have no idea why they used this, especially directly after a disclaimer about none of this story being real, and then they're just showing real footage from the city street. After this, we see a woman leaving early from a club and apologizing to a person on the inside. Some men nearby notice her and see an easy target. Luckily, Kiryu is there to save her and gets there before the men do. He's reporting to someone over a device in his ear. He's calling for his associate, who is nearby with a car. But of course, the thugs get involved.
ねえ大丈夫よかったら俺らが女の子を食ってくよいいんだ間に合ってる
The two decide to take a taxi since the car is taking a while, and the girl mentions that she doesn't want her grandfather to get angry. The men in the alley try to get their attention. Osamu, seemingly of some importance, feigns dejection after the two try to get away. As the men swarm in, Kiryu realizes what he must do and separates the girl before dealing with the thugs himself.
恋ってのは障害があるほど燃えるもんださあお嬢様にいいとこ見せちゃおうぜ
We get our first introduction to combat, which we'll talk about in a bit. And Kiryu beats the goons into oblivion, uppercutting one of them onto Osamu's expensive car. After the dust has settled, the girl recognizes Osamu as the son of the president of Muthina, a trading house. His father and her grandfather know each other, it seems. He quickly recognizes this girl as the granddaughter of party chair Ogi Kubo, and this makes him immediately apologize for his actions. This is because Ogi Kubo is a high-ranking member of the Daidoji. This woman was out tonight meeting some friends in Roppongi, but the two decide to forget anything happened here, realizing that she has more important things to worry about. The car is still on its way as the girl gets sick in the alley. It seems that Kiryu has taken on the role of bodyguard during his hiatus, protecting individuals for pay and working for some sort of larger organization. This will obviously be expanded upon, but before we move on, we're treated to a new intro sequence that sees Kiryu brooding all over town, drinking and smoking and walking under the neon lights. I actually like this intro sequence, and it reminds me a bit of the ones from the Judgment series. A lot of people weren't big fans of it though, and that's because of the song in the background. The song is called Katatoki by Yojiro Noda and JID. JID is an American hip-hop artist, and while I do like hip-hop, the song just doesn't feel like it fits here for some reason. Two wildly different styles and tones clashing in this sequence. It's not a bad song, and it's not a bad intro, but the two together create a really weird pairing that just feels kind of goofy.
Can you handle a hand-to-hand if you're not advancing? There's no advantages. It bring madness, syncing up with the savages.
It was a pretty big whiplash when I started up the game and heard what I thought was JID through my headphones. Kiryu is walking along the street as he's approached by a woman in a car. She's been following and watching him all night, one of his handlers it seems. Kiryu gets in the car, ready to return to a life of control, without freedom. This freedom is even restricted in the car, as he isn't allowed to smoke inside of the vehicle.
さっきの店でもっと吸っときゃよかったな。シャバの空気を。
He already longs for the recent night when he had a few moments to himself. We then see Kiryu at a remote temple, meditating as a lone monk plays Go behind him. Kiryu thinks back to the events of Yakuza 6, the last time that we saw him outside of Yakuza 7. We are recapped on how he saved Haruka, Haruto, and Yuta, taking a bullet to protect them. Kiryu was tasked with helping the Daidoji's secrets in exchange for some money, but Kiryu wanted his death to be faked so that no one could use the kids at his orphanage to get to him ever again. This was his final act and the end of the Kiryu saga, to go away in the interest of protecting those that he loved. There's a lot more context to this story, about 7 games worth of context, technically. But like I said, I have videos about those games, and if you don't know the story by now, you probably shouldn't be watching this video in the first place. So scram, go on, get. This reflection begins Chapter 1, Hidden Dragon. We see the temple again as Kiryu is approached by a man named Hanawa, who is an agent in the service of the Daidoji. The Daidoji were mainly introduced in Yakuza 6, but were a faction of politicians, mostly that meant to control Japanese politics and economy. They also controlled a network of spies and assassins. This means that they are drastically different from the average Yakuza family that we would come to know in the series. Kiryu is essentially working as an agent for the Daidoji while he's in hiding. They have him in a bit of a stranglehold since he made the deal with them to fake his death, because they can, at any time, put the lives of Kiryu's family in jeopardy. Kiryu has to work for them. The faction also provides the orphanage with money, essentially supporting them. So if they back out, they're in a pretty tough situation, and Hanawa's arrival means that they have another job for him. It doesn't seem like these jobs are that frequent because the bodyguard job that we saw him take during the intro was months ago. Kiryu's new job expects him to provide security for a smuggling operation. The client is a group of freedom fighters under an authoritarian regime in Asia. They aren't viewed like that within their home country, though. They're seen as terrorists where they come from. Apparently, the CIA also works with the Daidoji from time to time, and they have tasked the faction with transporting the freedom fighters' goods back to Asia. They have a boat full of gold bullion that will supply their war efforts in their country. For some reason, exporting gold bullion is a legal nightmare, and so they need a lot of people to stand watch and protect this shipment as it's loaded. This is Kiryu's job, a seemingly pretty simple one from the get-go. Kiryu remarks that this isn't his kind of job, and Hanawa responds with a pretty clear threat.
あなたに他の予定はないし、ここ以外の行き場もないはずですが。お忘れなく。もしあなたがここを離れ、世間に桐生一馬が生きていたと漏れれば、我々は約束を破られたものとみなします。その時ペナルティを受けるのはあなただけじゃありません。あなたが人生を投げ打って守ろうとした大事な人や子供たちも。
We then jump to a few days later in the port of Yokohama. The port is full of Daidoji agents, waiting for the truck to arrive. I should also point this out now because I kind of forgot to mention it, but Kiryu is actually going by the name Joryu now. This is an explanation for the title, like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name. Kiryu has effectively gotten rid of his name and taken on a new one. This will be important throughout the story as he refuses to admit who he actually is, but as you and I both know this secret, I'll just keep referring to him as Kiryu from here on out. As Kiryu walks around the port, he is told to head back to his post by another Daidoji agent, who immediately outs him as Kiryu. Hanawa just told Kiryu that none of these people here knew who he was, but apparently this man was one of the ones who helped fake his death. Of course, since he knows who Kiryu is, he wants to test his strength, just like every tough guy we've ever met in these games. We have a short battle as we're introduced to some more aspects of the agent fighting style. Kiryu, of course, handles these guys easily, and Hanawa lets us know that the truck is running late. Kiryu makes a comment that he only learned this new style at the temple to kill time, and that he was really only killing time with this fight. This is all he'll be doing for the rest of his life. This is the sort of forlorn existence that Kiryu lives in now, just killing time. He's sort of living in a purgatory, in between alive and dead. He's not allowed to take care of the kids at the orphanage anymore, to spend time with his family, to see them grow. He's not even allowed to fight for what he believes in, to battle against the strong that take advantage of the weak. These things that he took joy in before, living a life, has been stripped away from him. Hanawa then fills Kiryu in on some of the details that we learn in Yakuza 7, mainly that the Tojo clan has been wiped out and that the Omi alliance has taken over, with Arakawa at the head of this whole ordeal. Kiryu, of course, reflects on this. The Tojo clan was incredibly important to him, and all that's gone now.
俺だけじゃねえさ。俺にとって大事な人たちはみんな登場界と切り離せない人生を送ってた。それが煙みてえに消えたなんて。どう言われても実感が湧かねえ。
Hanawa predicts as a whole that the days of the Yakuza are over in general, that they won't be able to strut around in the open any longer. The delivery truck arrives, but there's another vehicle in tow. Hanawa quickly realizes that something is wrong and the group is attacked. Molotovs are thrown, and thugs in masks exit the vehicle to lay waste to the group protecting the port. One man of note, wielding a baseball bat and wearing a Hanya mask, is present though. Kiryu steps in to play some defense and takes down the soldiers. Not everyone is defeated, though, as the Hanya mask man brutally uses his bat to cave in the head of the man that Kiryu fought, and Hanawa is taken captive. Kiryu tries to stop this and is immediately recognized by one of the goons. Kiryu and Hanawa are forced to fight off the goons on their own, and luckily they survive. It seems that this whole thing was a trap from the start, or at least it became a trap some point along the way. Back at the temple, Kiryu doesn't tell Hanawa about the fact that the attacker learned who he was. Hanawa tells him that they must have been connected to the CIA or the revolutionaries they were working with. When Hanawa reached out to the revolutionaries, though, they denied ever being involved in the smuggling operation. The CIA never reached out at all. Hanawa thinks that a mystery man, who he refers to as Mr. X, must have impersonated the revolutionaries and contacted the CIA with a fake deal in an attempt to abduct him. But the real mystery is, why would they want to abduct Hanawa? Hanawa is launching his own investigation into all this to find out who Mr. X is. He notes that the man in the mask had tattoos, signaling that he is probably a notable Yakuza. He thinks that this man might have connections with the Seiryu clan in Yokohama. He asks Kiryu to look into the Seiryu clan to try and find their Mr. X. We then jump over to Yokohama as Kiryu searches for the clan's headquarters. He finds the building and watches the entrance from a nearby rooftop. He initially thinks that the place is too quiet for them to have attacked the port just last night, but the Seiryu clan quickly catches on to Kiryu watching them and confronts him. They clearly know that he's a Daidoji agent. Someone already spotted Kiryu and outed him. Kiryu, of course, dispenses with them pretty quickly. He takes the thug's phone to see who sent him the picture, who was watching and following Kiryu around. Kiryu leaves and reports to Hanawa that the Seiryu had nothing to do with the attack. He's already being followed as he walks away from the building. He plans to lead them into a parking garage to try and shake them down for information. We are quickly set upon by a much larger group of people, though. Their leader arrives and tells Kiryu that they never believed the Dragon of Dojima was dead. Kiryu was right that his secret was out with these people. We'll talk about this more as the game goes on, but I just find it so funny that there's just this massive open secret that obviously Kiryu wasn't dead. Like, half the people we meet in the game are like, oh yeah, we never thought you were dead. Or they immediately identify Kiryu as soon as they lay eyes on him. It's super funny because it's such an important plot point that feels like it's treated very flippantly half the time. If everyone knows that Kiryu is alive, then the Daidoji can't exactly keep their secrets safe. And wouldn't that break the agreement? There's a lot of stuff like this in the game, and a lot of plot points that just feel sort of lazy, I guess. Kiryu defeats this man and confronts him on his identity. He says that he's a part of the Omi Alliance. Certain people back in Osaka figured out that Kiryu wasn't actually dead, so they tried to figure out who could have faked his death. They landed on the Daidoji and concocted the plan to fake a deal with them. This would bring out Hanawa and allow them to capture him, eventually getting Kiryu's location. But of course, they didn't have to do this because Kiryu was there and one of their men spotted him. Hanawa arrives to pick the two up and head out of town. On their way out, Kiryu still holds the fact that he isn't Kiryu.
では近江連合は桐生一馬を探そうとして昨夜の襲撃を。
ああ、ただの人違いだってのに、ずっと俺を桐生と呼んでる。
He refuses to admit his identity because it could mean that the whole deal with the Daidoji is in jeopardy. Mr. X says something interesting to Hanawa, that he's the only one stuck on Kiryu. Before Kiryu can ask him any questions, though, they're hit by a van. Mr. X manages to escape, and the man in the Hanya mask arrives, throwing Kiryu from the vehicle. They tell Kiryu to come with them, that they want his help, but he still refuses to admit who he is. The man in the mask's name is revealed to be Shishido, and Kiryu stops him from killing Hanawa. Kiryu and Shishido have a fight on the street, and they hit a standstill. Shishido takes off his mask after breaking it in a headbutt. Shishido reiterates that this is a fight to the death, and Kiryu changes his fighting stance, revealing his other style, Yakuza.
試したらどないや。そうや。
We beat up Shishido once again, but the fight stops as Mr. X is holding a gun to Hanawa's head. He tells Kiryu to not worry about him, to think about what's most important to him, once again holding the threat of the orphanage over his head. The captors have to leave Hanawa as the cops are about to arrive, and Kiryu clearly isn't coming with them willingly. Mr. X gives him a burner phone and tells him to wait for a call. If Kiryu does anything stupid, then Hanawa will be dead. Mr. X reveals that his name is Tsuruno from the Watase family, and that the patriarch, Masaru Watase, needs Kiryu's help. This changes things a bit because Watase has been a great friend and ally to Kiryu for a while now. Or, well, at least since Yakuza 5. He helped Kiryu before. That's all that matters. They're friends. Kiryu is then helped out by the local homeless camp. I just want to note something here real quick that I think maybe no one will actually care about, but Kiryu, Hanawa, and Tsuruno get in the car at the parking garage in Yokohama. They then drive directly north and get hit near the homeless encampment, which is like 2 blocks away, except they're driving for like a few minutes without stopping. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I just thought it was weird. While at the homeless camp, the men there mention that a homeless man lives there who used to work as a nurse, and that he recently took in a man who was shot and is taking care of him. This is obviously Nanba and Ichiban from Yakuza 7, with this game's events taking place mostly at the same time as that game. We can actually try to investigate this tent, and Kiryu notes that he would like to, but he doesn't have time since the cops are on his tail. Kiryu has to sneak out of the city, avoiding the police, before a Daidoji agent named Yoshimura arrives to bring Kiryu back. They lost Hanawa's GPS signal and came to investigate. Kiryu tells them everything, but they take the burner phone and demand that he return to the temple to update them. This guy is now Kiryu's handler while Hanawa is gone, and he isn't nearly as nice as Hanawa. He doesn't even really believe that these guys that Kiryu is talking about are a part of the Omi, since there isn't any definitive proof. On top of that, he turned the burner phone off so they can't be tracked, meaning Kiryu could miss the call that could save Hanawa's life. The Daidoji really don't care about this. They plan to abandon Hanawa regardless. In their faction, if you're captured, you're supposed to take your own life to protect their secrets. The agents restrain Kiryu and mean to punish him for his failures. The monk from earlier shows up with the burner phone, and it's powered back on at this point. The monk wants to save Hanawa, and this distraction allows Kiryu to take down the thugs in the room. This man tells Kiryu that he's not a real monk. The temple is just a facade. He used to be a treasurer for the Daidoji, and he recruited Hanawa back in the day. He asks Kiryu to save him, and of course, this becomes Kiryu's main goal. But first, we have to escape the temple full of Daidoji agents who do not align with Kiryu's views. We fight through some large groups of enemies and some mini-bosses before Yoshimura tries to stop him at the exit. Kiryu explains that Hanawa is the only connection that he has in this new life, one that he finds to be mostly meaningless. He respected the courage that he showed in the face of death and the ability to look that same death in the face.
俺はもう自分の過去も人生も名前すら捨てている。未来に希望もねえ。こんな人間の面白くもねえ人生を今全部知ってくれてるのはあいつだけ。
And Kiryu sort of considers this his last stand. He has a choice here between becoming Yoshimura's lapdog or saving Hanawa. And this is the last thing that Kiryu has left, his principles, his morals, what he does in the face of evil. He clearly has chosen the more difficult path, but one that might be more fulfilling in the end. We have a boss battle here with Yoshimura and his goons, with Yoshimura mostly taking pot shots at us from afar. After the fight, Kiryu is contacted by Tsuruno, who tells him to meet him at the Survive bar in Ijincho. Kiryu arrives and sits down with Tsuruno, who arrived alone. He correctly deduces everything that happened with Kiryu and the Daidoji, their arrangement about protecting the kids at Morning Glory. Before Tsuruno will tell Kiryu everything and why Watase needs Kiryu's help, he needs Kiryu to agree to help them. He tells Kiryu that if he does help them, they will fake his death again, thus getting rid of the Daidoji's grip on him and allowing Kiryu to be a free man. He'll be able to see the kids at Morning Glory once again. But for some reason, to do this, they need to kill Hanawa, so they're going to double fake Kiryu's death. This big reveal is where the chapter ends, and we begin Chapter 2, Castle on the Water. We see the Morning Glory Orphanage for the first time in a long time. We don't really see anyone specifically, just their vague impression. Silhouettes of characters that we don't know, identities that we can infer, people just out of focus. Before the scene ends, we see Haruka telling Haruto that it's time to go. We jump back to Tsuruno, who is fleshing out his plan. They're going to kill Hanawa and then find a corpse that looks like Kiryu and place it next to Hanawa's body so the Daidoji will think he died. Of course, Kiryu isn't going to go through with this plan because he can't just kill Hanawa for his own selfish intents. So he tells Tsuruno that that plan won't work because he isn't even Kiryu. He then gives Kiryu a red tiger keychain. He's supposed to take this to a woman named Akame, who could give him some more information, even though Kiryu isn't sold on the plan. If he doesn't do this, they'll also just kill Hanawa anyways, so Kiryu's hand is forced. At this point, though, why haven't the Daidoji attacked the orphanage? They told Kiryu if he didn't follow their orders, then they would punish the kids, but they haven't done that, and don't do that for the rest of the story, at least not for this infraction. Kiryu just beat up all of them at their headquarters and escaped. It's not because they want to save Hanawa, because they already talked about the fact that they didn't care about him. Tsuruno leaves, and Kiryu calls the monk to update him on Hanawa's status and his plan to save him. He called the monk because he wants him to tell the Daidoji, and the monk rightly says it doesn't really matter because they won't be rushing to save Kiryu or Hanawa. But Kiryu tells him that if he dies, that Hanawa's whereabouts die with him. As if that matters to the Daidoji. They already told him that it didn't matter, and they literally do not care about him at all. This is just the beginning of this game having no sort of consistency with its stakes or rules, so get used to it. Kiryu then heads to Sotenbori, one of the 2 locations where the bulk of this game will take place. Kiryu asks some of the homeless around town about Akame, and he's eventually led to some thugs in a parking lot. He shows them the red tiger, at which they're very impressed. They of course try to steal it from him, and we have to beat them down. At this point, Akame shows up, a woman with bright red hair. She's the city's jack-of-all-trades, as she calls it. This really means that she's the fixer, or informant, for the city. She collects and sells information on the happenings in Sotenbori. She's basically the florist from the earlier Yakuza games, but way less powerful. She spoke to Tsuruno, but she doesn't work for him. She was supposed to take Kiryu in when he showed her the red tiger. Akame takes Kiryu back to her hideout, which is a small office in the back alley of the city. So when Tsuruno gave Kiryu the red tiger, he only told him that it would bring him closer to finding out where Hanawa was. Akame knows that this red tiger will get Kiryu into the castle, a mysterious venue where Kiryu assumes Hanawa is being held. That's the ultimate goal for him, to go along with this plan and hope that he gets some results out of it. But this is where the story comes to a screeching halt for a bit, because Akame needs us to help her out with her network before we continue. We have to help Akame deal with some welfare thieves in town. They're convincing homeless people they can give them shelter, and then scamming them for money, giving them incredibly poor living conditions. The Omi are the ones behind this, and Kiryu, of course, deals with them easily, forcing them to release the homeless that they've basically taken captive. It's a short little detour, but this whole thing serves as an introduction to the Akame Network, one of the main side activities / mini-games that Gaiden introduces. And we are forced to interact with the system before we advance the story. There's no way around it. You don't have to do everything, of course, but we might as well get this stuff out of the way while we're on the topic. The Akame Network is essentially a list of requests and tasks that we can take on in Sotenbori to help the people of the city. These come in many different forms. The first are stroll and patrol missions. These are god-awful and probably one of my least favorite implementations of side mechanics in a Yakuza game. There are a ton of different icons placed all over the city map. We can head to these icons and get a request from the person there. These can be retrieving a lost item for a person, giving someone an item from a store, beating up some thugs, or taking pictures. Some of them are a bit more specific, like ones that tie into larger sub-stories or requests, but those are generally few and far between. The bulk of these stroll and patrol missions are how I described, virtually inconsequential fetch quests that are tedious, repetitive, and boring. Now, it's a side activity, so you could just say that you can ignore this entire system, but like I said, that's wrong, because the Akame Network ties into just about everything. First of all, it ties into the main story. At this current point in the story, we need to interact with it to continue, and at a later point in the story, we'll need to increase the Akame Network's rank to level 10 to continue. The network also ties into the leveling system, because not only does Like a Dragon Gaiden bring back using money to upgrade our stats from Yakuza 0, but we also need to use Akame points to unlock these upgrades as well, meaning that if we don't interact with this system, we can't buy skill upgrades. This system also ties into the other main minigame that the game has, the Coliseum. We need to level up the Akame Network to unlock various levels of the Coliseum, so it's not really that optional, you just have to do it. Completing these requests all over the city nets us the Akame points that we use for just about everything. These points can also be used to purchase various items and gear from Akame's shop. We can use the money we get from completing these quests to purchase upgrades to the network that give us more Akame points or cause enemies on the street to drop more money, etc. The stroll and patrol missions are just so bland though. If we have to retrieve an item for someone, it's always like right behind them. We never have to search or get creative with where we're looking. The people that request items mean that we need to go to the store to buy that item, but if you wise up pretty early in the game, you'll realize that you should probably just buy a few of every item so you can circumvent running around to different shops. The combat encounters are short and boring, and I'm sorry, but outside of Aloe Happy, I don't want to be running around taking pictures of shit. There is another way that we can get Akame points, and that's from completing the requests that Akame has listed in her network screen. These are essentially the sub-stories for Gaiden, because there are no sub-stories out in the wild. This means that every single sub-story is filtered through Akame. We have to go to her hideout, take the request, listen to her introduce us to the request, and then we can take on the sub-story. You could also just take on requests in batches so that you can run out and complete them, but then I guess you lack the completeness of each story. Not like it much matters though, because the sub-stories in Gaiden fucking suck. There's a few decent ones, like a story in which Kiryu is sent to help a man that claims he was brought up at Sunflower Orphanage, the same orphanage that Kiryu was raised in. He ends up helping the man, who at first seems altruistic in his pursuits to run an orphanage of his own. It's eventually revealed that he is taking kids from the orphanage to work for him and treating them poorly. It's this pretty interesting exploration of how both Kiryu and this man were raised by Kazuma, someone who Kiryu looks up to, but they ultimately took the same teachings in wildly different ways. Ghosts of Sotenbori sees you tracking down different people all over town who are impersonating the deceased Ryuji Goda. This is all in an effort to resurrect the Go-Ryu clan and bring it back to its former glory, which Kiryu, of course, squashes down immediately. Seeking Advice is a story where we're contacted by a young man who wants to know how to deal with women, but by the time we get there, he says that he's already gotten advice from a new AI chatbot on the market. Kiryu spends this sub-story trying to get the kid to realize how to think and live on his own, and he eventually does, but only after following through on some pretty bad advice given to him by the chatbot. One of the sub-stories sees Kiryu collecting golden balls to give to a man named Shen, who will grant you one of his wishes. This can give you 1,000,000 yen, 100 healing items, or a sellable item called Shen-san's panties. Not that interesting, but pretty useful. End the Destruction is a sub-story that I'm kind of split on. We learn about some homeless hunters in the area and end up finding out that Kaito and Higashi from the Judgment series are on the case. It's this interesting little story where the two end up fighting a whole bunch for some reason because Kaito is given bad information or something, but it just feels really out of character. Like the only thing they could think to do was have him and Kiryu fight a bunch. I'll admit it was really nice to see Kaito again, especially because I just adore the Judgment series so much. But I think I would have preferred maybe a longer mission that's a bit more Judgment themed. Like maybe we have to solve a case and Kaito and Kiryu can actually work together and you don't have to include Judgment systems in the mission, but just lean towards that game a little bit for this specific event. The whole thing just felt a bit off and it seemed like a way to appease the Judgment fans, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we won't be appeased until there's a Judgment 3. Outside of these 5 sub-stories, that's literally mostly it. There are technically 34 sub-stories listed in the game, but all of the rest are either tied into the Coliseum and aren't really sub-stories, or they're incredibly bland fighting the Red Gang around town and then fighting their leader and so on and so forth, or they're missions to recruit characters for the Coliseum minigame. These usually lack any sort of substance when it comes to storytelling or structure. It's just that we find a guy that wants to join our team, but he can't, so we have to beat somebody up or talk to some people and then return to him, and now he'll join. It's a massive shame, honestly, because the sub-stories are one of my favorite parts of the Yakuza games. They always have been the brightest points of the games outside of the main story, going on these little adventures, some that can be incredibly touching, some that have massive depths, and others that are just funny and a general good time. Gaiden completely lacks any of that and just shoves in incredibly lazy and boring content to replace that. I would like to talk about one decent part of the Akame Network, and that's Akame's story herself. As we level up the Akame Network, we can actually level up our bond with Akame. It's not a full system like it is in Like a Dragon, it's just connected to the Akame Network level, but like the turn-based games, we can unlock drink link conversations that allow us to talk to Akame and give her advice about her current struggles. It's actually a decent little story about Akame wanting to chase her dreams as an idol. She's worried that her current work will interfere, but Kiryu encourages her to keep on with her dream, and even after getting scammed, she still does. It's a nice little story for a small character, but one that I was decently interested in until the end. I feel mostly split on the side activities in Gaiden. We'll get further into the other activity later in the video, but the Akame Network feels like it should be one of the game's larger side activities, and it really just ends up being a massive chore. Part of the main story introduction also has us go to the Cabaret Club, one of the most gooner versions of the minigame that the Yakuza series has ever had, but hey, if that's your thing. But after completing a few tasks, we are sent to meet a legendary weaponsmith in town. We find this man drunk in an alley, and he ends up giving us new gadgets that we can use with our agent style. Since this is where the agent style starts to broaden a bit, it's probably a good time to talk about combat in Gaiden overall. Like the other brawler games in the series, Yakuza's combat consists of light attacks, heavy attacks, and heat actions. We can generate heat as we hit enemies, and this heat can then be used to perform heat actions under the right circumstances. We can also activate X mode, which slowly decreases our heat bar in exchange for a temporary strength increase, and moves that are exclusive to this mode. Gaiden has 2 fighting styles that we can switch between. The Yakuza style, which is basically a strange combination of Kiryu's dragon fighting style from previous games, and like a little bit of the Beast style, and the Agent style, which is new to this entry. The Agent style is the style that Kiryu uses while acting as an agent for the Daidoji faction. It's a faster, more agile style that's mostly technical, meaning that we do smaller amounts of damage with each hit, but we can attack far faster than in the other style. The big addition to this style, though, are the gadgets. We get most of these gadgets from Mizurogi, the drunkard weaponsmith that we just met in the alley. He crafted the gadgets that the Daidoji currently use. There are 4 in total, the first being the spider web that Kiryu has at the beginning of the game. This can be used to grab enemies and throw them around. We get the drones after we meet Mizurogi for the first time. The drones can be summoned by holding down the Y button in combat. The drones will seek out an enemy and attack them until they're swatted out of the air by our foe. The exploding cigarettes are summoned by holding the B button and will explode after a short period of time, and the jet-powered shoes will propel us forward, damaging enemies that we run into. Most of these gadgets are terrible and really don't feel good or natural to use in combat whatsoever. The spider wire gadget is fine and certainly has its applications, but we can't use it on bosses or larger enemies, so it's really only good for clearing out crowds. And that's only once we've upgraded it so that it can target more than one person. The drones are incredibly ineffective, barely damaging enemies at all. It kind of seems like they were meant to stop enemies from blocking, giving us an in to start a combo on them, but outside of that, they're nearly worthless. They also take forever to summon, and we can't do anything while we're summoning them outside of trying to avoid enemies. The exploding cigarettes seem like they would be good, but they don't really fit the Yakuza enemy design. People usually just end up running directly past it after we throw them, and by the time they explode, the enemy is way out of the way. You can try and lead them into the explosion, but you'll just get hurt. The jet-fueled shoes are okay and do alright damage if you can control it, but they're mostly good for clearing out weaker enemies or for starting a combo. Even if these things did work, they all feel really cheap in the end anyways. If I could effectively kill enemies by standing there and calling in drones, I'm not sure I would really want to. And the moments where I did try to clear out groups with my jet shoes just felt awful. It didn't feel like I was actually doing anything, but that these gadgets were giving me an unfair advantage rather than besting my foes in hand-to-hand combat. It's an alright idea, and I wish they were more fleshed out, but the gadgets really just aren't good. But that isn't really the end of the woes that the agent style brings. The style itself really just isn't that good either. Combos are very light and barely deal any damage. It's not like we can't kill enemies or bosses with it, it just takes far longer than the Yakuza style. It definitely has its moments in the game, and certain fights feel tailored to it, moments where we need to be more technical and precise, but a lot of those moments can be easily handled by the Yakuza style as well. The only leg up that the agent style really has is its X or heat mode. When activating this, the light combo will now suddenly see Kiryu basically teleporting to the enemy and destroying their health bar with a fast, sweeping attack. We basically just snap to enemies around the battlefield, and it's so overpowered. The only way that this gets stopped is if we're hit in heat mode, which brings our heat gauge down a little bit. It's actually pretty OP and honestly just feels like something you're constantly waiting for when using this style, because everything else is pretty ineffective. There's not much to say about the Yakuza style in general. It's much better than the agent style and will generally take you through most of the game. I didn't use it as much in the Coliseum because the agent heat mode was just far superior for clearing out all the goons you have to deal with, but it's Kiryu's classic style that I think is ripped straight from Yakuza 6, but I can't be sure. The odd thing about this game's combat is that it feels like it's this weird mishmash of the Judgment games, Yakuza 0, Kiwami 2, and 6. There's just a little bit of everything from all of those games in here, and it's not the worst ever, but it also doesn't work particularly well. It's no Lost Judgment. We can upgrade stats with money just like in Yakuza 0, of course also using the Akame points that we earn from the network. This part of the system has its issues as well, primarily because there's so many other things in the game that we need to spend money on. We need to spend money on clothing items to finish certain Akame Network requests. We need to spend money on the Coliseum to get more fighters and to upgrade those fighters. We need to spend money to upgrade the Akame Network. It's a lot, so it often feels like you don't have enough money for everything, which is probably good on the balance side, but it does mean that we have to do a lot of grinding to get to the actual end game. There's also a gear system that allows us to equip pieces of gear that increase our base stats and various resistances against attacks. The whole system is serviceable and probably feels closest to Lost Judgment's system, but not nearly as clean and smooth as that game was. Because of the lack of variety, you end up railroaded into really a few choices, removing a lot of the choice in combat. Therefore, combat does not feel your own, but based on pre-programmed decisions, because why would you do anything else? Back in the main story, Kiryu meets Mizurogi, pulling him out of his drunken stupor. After introducing us to the drones and showing us how to use them, He tells Kiryu that he invented the agent style that he uses. The Daidoji techniques in general were ones that he came up with when he was a combat trainer for various combat groups back in the day. We can then get the exploding cigarettes from an old woman in town, and finally we can go to the castle after this hour-long interlude. The castle is a massive barge in the middle of the ocean that's host to various casinos, gambling halls, and a huge Coliseum. Akame herself describes it as an adult theme park. The castle is run by the Kijin clan, a family that's a part of the Omi alliance and handles all their dirty work. We immediately see a man and a woman in a cart being pulled by various people. They're being whipped in an effort to get them to move faster. These people are in incredible gambling debt and are now forced to basically work as slaves for the castle. Kiryu quickly finds out why Tsuruno sent him here, because the Omi families take turns running the casino each night, and tonight happens to be the Watase's turn to spearhead things. The red tiger we've been given is basically your ticket to get inside of the Coliseum. If Kiryu wins the Coliseum battles, then maybe someone from the Watase family will be there to give him a prize, possibly Tsuruno himself. Everything's starting to come together at this point, and while it's still complicated, our goal is now pretty simple: win the Coliseum. We head there where Kiryu sees Shishido. He tells Kiryu that Tsuruno is currently watching over Hanawa. He tells us a little about the patriarch of the Kijin clan, Homare Nishitani III, and he's cool. Kiryu literally doesn't give a shit though, and Shishido leaves.
まさに関西国道の鏡や。
俺にはどうでもいい話だ。
Kiryu then signs up for the Coliseum, gets a mask to wear when fighting, and is ready to roll. The battles here are actually kind of interesting, because the Coliseum is hosting historical Yakuza battles. They're staging battles that we've seen in the series before, but of course using look-alike imposters. It's sort of a theatrical interpretation of the battles, except it's real and people are dying. There's one with a Watase lookalike, a Kiryu lookalike, and even a Ryuji Goda lookalike, except Kiryu tells him afterwards that he was nothing like Goda.
見た目だけはいい線いってたがな。あいつは虎の意を狩るなんてなね。死んでもやんねえ。
I love how years later, Kiryu still feels it necessary to hold up Goda's honor. It's a very small thing, but it shows that this man had an impact on Kiryu's life even after all this time. Kiryu goes to see Shishido after the battles, and he commends Kiryu for putting on a good show. Of course, Kiryu is only here for answers. Shishido doesn't care though, and info dumps about his life story. His father was a gambler, and Shishido ended up as a Coliseum fighter to pay back his debts. We see a flashback of him playing Russian roulette with Nishitani. Tsuruno was the one that pulled him out of the gutter and helped him build himself back up. Of course, Shishido knows that keeping Nishitani in his pocket is the right move though, which is why we see him cavorting with the man moments before this. Shishido doesn't understand why Kiryu won't return, why he won't be the Dragon of Dojima once more. From his perspective, he's worked his entire life to achieve any semblance of fame or power or status. The fact that Kiryu just squanders it is an insult to him.
喧嘩最強。仁義と男気にあふれた伝説の極道。まばゆいばかりの人生を歩まれてきた。せやったら。こそこそ死んだふりなんぞせんで堂々と名乗り出たらええ。花輪さんのことも大道寺のことも全部忘れて好き放題やりましょう。桐生一馬よみがえらせて俺らともう一花咲かせましょうや。あんたかてほんまはそれを望んでるはずです。なあ、せやろうが。
Kiryu, of course, says that he isn't even Kiryu anyways, so shut up, idiot. Tsuruno is holding Hanawa at a specific building, and of course wants Kiryu to come get him and run through a gauntlet of goons. Before Shishido leaves, he vows to fight Kiryu after he's done with all this. We head back to Sotenbori and journey to the building that Hanawa is being held in. We get a classic Yakuza fight sequence as we move through this building and dispense with groups of thugs and mini-bosses. At the top, we find Hanawa beaten and bloodied. He claims that he was fine and didn't need Kiryu to rush over here. We then have a boss battle with Tsuruno out on the roof as he wields a hot iron poker. If we get hit with this thing, Kiryu is doused in flames for a few seconds. There's some pretty sweet fighting here, some good action sequences. It's a decent boss battle overall. After Tsuruno is dispensed with, Kiryu takes the bindings off of Hanawa and thanks Joryu, for saving his life. Talking to Kiryu, he basically tells him that Watase told him they need Kiryu's help no matter what. He took that as I should kidnap and torture his handler until he agrees to work with us. Just a slight miscommunication. Happens all the time. They need to move to a Daidoji base to speak about the Watase plans more privately, but before they do that, Tsuruno makes one final plea with Kiryu to take out Hanawa right here and now. He offers to clean up the mess for Kiryu, which would free him of the Daidoji. There's a lot of people in this game that hate to see Kiryu like this, that hate that he has become the lapdog of the Daidoji. But obviously, Kiryu has his reasons for staying on their leash. He would prefer not to be subservient to them, but he would do anything for the safety of his family. These people clearly don't understand the true Dragon of Dojima and are more attached to the myth of him rather than the real thing. Tsuruno tells Kiryu that they intend to dissolve the Omi Alliance and the Tojo clan. They're currently waiting for Watase to get out so that he can announce this on the Omi's end. This is what we saw happen in Yakuza 7, but we're seeing how Kiryu got involved and what his role exactly was. The Watase family thinks that the only way they could stop all of the clans going into open revolt would be to have Kiryu with them. Kiryu eventually gives Hanawa the burner phone so that he can contact the Daidoji, and, once again, refuses Tsuruno's offer. Outside, Hanawa asks Kiryu why he didn't take the deal and let him die. Kiryu says that this whole pact was his idea in the first place. It would be wrong for him to let someone die to get rid of something he started.
もうこの先の人生に何かを望んでいい立場じゃねえ。そんな俺のために他の誰かを死なせらんねえだろ。
Kiryu then reflects on the people who lost their lives pursuing what they believed in. Kazuma, Nishiki, and Yumi. What, no Rikiya? After giving this answer, Hanawa leaves and we can head back to Akame's place for a nap. And then there's this awful segment where the game reintroduces us to the Coliseum. After all that stuff, we head back to Akame's, and she wants us to go back to the Coliseum so that we can see the actual mini-game that the game has, not just some scripted battles, which is fine. I don't really care if the game shows you what mini-games or side activities it has to offer. Most Yakuza games do this anyways, as the mini-games are generally integrated into the main game as well. But why didn't we do all of this when we were at the Coliseum? This is one of the most annoying things about Gaiden, is that it doesn't just get on with its story, it interrupts itself constantly, which for me pulled out most of the impact that the story would have had anyways. If I want to get to the story, I really can't, because it's constantly stopping to force me into other areas. And this happens sometimes with other games in the series, but here the game is much shorter, so it ends up taking up a larger percentage of the little story that we do get. So we head back to the Coliseum, beat a guy named Hammerhead, and get a full introduction into the Coliseum and its associated story. So it's probably time we detour as well and talk about this minigame. Once Kiryu is invited to battle in this arena, we can take on different sets of fights. The tournament fights will see us controlling one person against different foes across consecutive matches. The Hell Rumble sees us controlling one person against a larger team of enemies. And the Hell Team Rumble allows us to pit our own created team against another large team of enemies. There's another category of matches called special event matches, but there's only a few of these. Mr. Try and Hit Me returns, and some gambling matches where we can bet on ourselves show up. The Coliseum overall is pretty cool. Some of the more tedious aspects tend to drag it down and make actually completing the whole thing pretty unenjoyable, but for a bit, it's pretty good. First of all, the general concept of an arena or a Coliseum hasn't been present in Yakuza games since 5, unless you count the Ishin remake. So seeing it return in this entry is a nice addition. Just generally getting to take on matches and beat up fools is a good time. Most of the problem with this system comes from the Hell Team Rumbles and the larger story that the mode presents. We can recruit teammates for the Coliseum in various ways. We can find them through sub-stories, we can recruit them around the castle, or we can hire them from recruiters for a fee. I should also note that we can use Majima, Saejima, and Daigo in the Coliseum, and they're probably the best 3 fighters present, but they're locked behind a paid DLC, which is pretty shitty. You can also choose a leader when going into battle, meaning that you can play literally any of these characters. They aren't that powerful, which kind of sucks, but it's technically the first time in the series that we can play Daigo, which is cool. These teammates can be leveled up by using them in battle. Having successful battles also increases their bond with Kiryu, making their special abilities more powerful. You absolutely need your teammates leveled all the way up if you're going to complete all the battles, which is necessary to be able to complete the associated sub-stories and to eventually fight Amon. We can speed the leveling process up by purchasing items from the castle, which increase the XP of the character that we gifted to. We can do the same thing with Bond, but it's just a really tedious process because it requires you going to this fighter's lounge and running around to find the fighter. This could be a lot easier if there was a small sub-menu in the Coliseum menu that allowed you to do these things. The other problem is that buying these items requires a lot of money, and you have to grind the Coliseum for this money. This means redoing certain matches over and over again to get exorbitant amounts of cash to spend on scrolls. Eventually, you'll get your team leveled up and ready to fight the Hell Team Rumbles, and then the Kings of the Arena. There are 4 kings, some of which you have to fight in Team Rumbles, and others that you fight one-on-one. I'm not sure why it wasn't all the way one or the other, but that's fine. After all of this, you can complete a sub-story back in Sotenbori that allows you to bring an end to the family that's been forcing these kings to fight. There's a whole story here about the characters stealing Mizurugi's gadgets and using them in the Coliseum, but it just really isn't worth getting into. The team battles themselves are just really poorly done in my opinion. The early ones are actually really fun, but later into the list, the bosses and enemies just have insane health bars. The matches are also timed, so you have to kill these enemies before time runs out, or you lose. Even if it's just your team wailing on the boss, you're gonna lose if that timer runs out. Most of the teams also have the ability to heal and recover health every couple minutes or so, which makes the health problem even worse. This whole thing is just a very weird system, and outside of some of the one-on-one battles, this never really felt like a fun affair. The big team fights were a good idea in theory, but the fact that we have to grind a ton just to level them up saps any sort of interest you could have in this system. Completing at least some of this system is required before we can continue the story though, because Akame wants us to get a gold rank before we can advance the narrative. This means completing a certain amount of silver matches and getting her network leveled up to 10, which also means we have to go do more stroll and patrol stuff around town. Once we eventually complete this task, we can finally return to the story. We'll get a call from Hanawa letting us know that he arrived at the hideout and he asks us to meet him there. When we get there, we find out that the Daidoji are in a state of emergency after finding out that the Omi basically all know that Kiryu is alive. Tsuruno is locked up in a room nearby, and Yoshimura comes back into the fray. He's mad that Kiryu disobeyed orders even though he saved Hanawa. The Daidoji's mysterious boss wants to talk to Kiryu now. He appears faceless over a video call. This man is upset that Kiryu's identity has been revealed because it violates the terms of their original agreement. This means he wants Kiryu to kill the 25 men in the Watase family that saw him, including Tsuruno, Shishido, and by extension, Masaru Watase himself. Hanawa basically tells Kiryu that the kids at the orphanage will be punished if he doesn't do this. And listen, I'm not trying to nitpick here, but why is it Kiryu's fault that he was spotted? First of all, someone within the Daidoji spotted him during the mission that he was sent on. Then, directly after, he was spotted by one of the attackers on that very same mission. Shouldn't the Daidoji be the ones who are apologizing? Like, Kiryu didn't want to go on these missions. He actively told them that. Maybe don't send the guy out on missions if you want his identity kept secret. Kiryu enters the room that they're keeping Tsuruno in, wielding a handgun, but of course, he doesn't kill him. He turns the gun on Hanawa and lets Tsuruno escape. Kiryu then has to fight the Daidoji, both Yoshimura and Hanawa at the same time. Kiryu is about to call the orphanage and warn the kids to leave, but Hanawa shows him a live feed of the building with Daidoji men stationed outside. If he were to tell them to run, they would be captured. Hanawa will call off the men if Kiryu obeys their wishes. Hanawa starts to break down at Kiryu's insolence, mad that he wouldn't just do what they said. Kiryu is then the one held captive in the nearby room, and we begin Chapter 3, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Kiryu is about to be punished and is taken out of his cell after 3 days of torture. He only asks if the kids are all right, which Yoshimura confirms. Hanawa stands outside holding a gun, and Kiryu realizes his fate, that he's about to be killed. Because of Hanawa's mistakes, he's now going to have to take Kiryu's life, something he clearly doesn't want to do. As he finds it hard to make the choice, all of the agents aim their guns at him, supposedly making the choice easier because his own life is on the line now. Hanawa tries to kill Kiryu, but even with his permission, he can't do it. This is obviously because of the grace that Kiryu has shown him so far, and how much Kiryu has gone out of his way to save Hanawa for seemingly no reason. Kiryu chastises him for this decision, one made in clear bravery.
いいんだ花は俺はもう3年前に死んでいたあんたを恨んだりはしねえ
そうやってあなたはいつも真っ先に自分から犠牲にして
But just as Hanawa is about to be killed, the leader of the Daidoji strolls in, revealing that this was all a test to ensure that Hanawa would be a good manager to Kiryu, that he would never kill him, and the gun was loaded. This was in some roundabout way to get 50 billion yen worth of properties from Tsuruno so that Kiryu could be handed off from the Daidoji to the Watase family for a short period of time. They're the only ones that can know that Kiryu is alive. If Kiryu declines this offer, they will give the money back and Kiryu will be killed. Kiryu demands that the children be left alone and that the faction stops spying on them, to which their leader gives his word. Outside, the monk from before and the leader have a conversation. He was the one that begged for Hanawa and Kiryu's lives. They needed the money from Tsuruno to bargain with large political leaders. This whole scene is so strange. Like, why does all of this happen in the first place? I get that it's a test, but what if Hanawa pulled the trigger? The gun was loaded, so Kiryu would have died, the Daidoji wouldn't get the money, and I guess their secrets would have been kept safe, but also Hanawa would have failed somehow. Isn't the whole point of the Daidoji that you have to be loyal to the faction and follow their rules? They've chastised Kiryu and Hanawa for breaking those rules this whole time, but this was a test to break those rules? I don't know. This just seems like such a weird moment for the game. It feels like we could have easily just had the Daidoji make a deal for Kiryu's services to advance things forward. And maybe a scene where Hanawa sneaks into the torture room and earnestly thanks Kiryu for saving his life. Maybe by breaking some rule about not talking to him. Maybe even lower the stakes a bit and just have Hanawa be forced to torture Kiryu, but he doesn't want to because of everything that Kiryu has done for him. It just sort of plays to the fact that the Daidoji seem like they aren't as competent of an organization as they were made out to be. And maybe this is on purpose. Maybe this is meant to be an intentional commentary on how they aren't that different from the Yakuza. If so, then I think it's an interesting choice, but one that certainly isn't as overt as it should be. Or maybe I'm just dumb and need it spelled out for me. Who knows? Either way, Kiryu heads back to Akame's place, where, after doing some side activities and unlocking story advancement, Kiryu is called by Tsuruno to meet him at the castle. We meet him in the VIP area by the pool. Tsuruno wants to get more people on their side for the upcoming dissolution meeting. He needs support for Watase because he knows the Yakuza will not be happy when they hear this. He tells Kiryu that they already have Daigo, Saejima, Majima, and even Arakawa, who is currently working under orders from the 6th chairman. I would call a lot of this recapping because we know what happens in Yakuza 7, but honestly, Kiryu doesn't know it, and it catches people up to speed who don't remember or who haven't played that game. So it actually works pretty well at killing two birds with one stone. The last loose end that they need to tie up before this whole dissolution plan is to get rid of Nishitani. He's the only patriarch that would stand up to Watase and potentially ruin the whole plan. He's powerful enough to reform the Omi after its dissolution. They don't need him killed, they just need him out while the dissolution happens, which means we're gonna need to beat his ass. Of course, the Watase family can't do it openly. They need Kiryu to do it. Kiryu also can't do it here because he won't be able to escape, so he has to attack Nishitani when he's off the castle. But Nishitani has been living on the castle for a year now. We need to find some way to draw him out. Just then, Nishitani radios in to Tsuruno. He tells Tsuruno and Kiryu to come say hi. Watase declines because Kiryu is supposed to be Joryu still. Of course, Nishitani wants what he wants and sends a bunch of thugs to fight us. We need to defeat them, which starts a massive escape from the castle. Kiryu punches Tsuruno so that they still think he's with the Omi. Kiryu rushes out, making his way through the goons blocking him. We get this amazing sequence where Kiryu swings with his spiderweb gadget, one of the very few in the game that actually uses these gadgets in an awesome way. Kiryu finds himself in the lower areas of the castle, the inner workings of the ship. Tons of the indebted slaves are sent after us. I thought this was a great touch as well. Using these characters as fighters for the castle security in this sequence was just awesome. Kiryu eventually makes it through the castle, where there's a ton of masked men that pop out of a clown head. After defeating them, he tries to make an escape, but Nishitani cuts him off. He wants to see Kiryu's face, but Kiryu, of course, challenges him to a fight first. We get an actually pretty great boss battle here. Nishitani's fighting style sees him relying on a dagger and quick attacks to hurt us. He's pretty difficult to get a hold of, and there's this awesome sequence in the middle where Kiryu just bodies him. After Kiryu thrashes him, he lets Kiryu know that he's very much aware that his name is not Joryu. We then begin Chapter 4, The Laughing Man. And honestly, this is where the game and its story start to actually get pretty good. I can safely say that this game has a lot of problems, but I just cannot say that it doesn't stick the landing. We cut back into Nishitani figuring everything out, that he knows Kiryu's identity, but Kiryu knocks him out. His goons try to step in, but Tsuruno stops them. Kiryu heads back to Sotenbori, specifically Akame's apartment. Tsuruno tells Kiryu that Nishitani is riled up and looking for him after he was embarrassed. The two decide to meet in the city so they can figure out a plan to lure him off his ship. Before this, we get another side activity for Akame. Some thugs have stolen Mizurugi's gadgets from his workshop. Kiryu has to put a stop to this, and we start fighting enemies that are using our own gadgets against us. This sort of ties back into the larger Coliseum story, as the four kings there will each have a specific gadget that they specialize in. We meet Tsuruno the next day, who brings 30 million yen to try and lure Nishitani out. They're going to poke the bear, so to speak, by making a big scene in the city with all this money. Kiryu and Tsuruno head over to the Cabaret Grand, where they meet up with Shishido and start to spend lavish amounts of money to try and get the Kijin clan's attention. This is all in the interest of roughing up some Kijin clan thugs and basically openly inviting their patriarch into the city. This whole mission is a night on the town with the boys, and it's actually a pretty fun time. I don't mind this type of detour as much because, for one, it serves the overall story. We're trying to get somewhere with this, to complete a goal that the narrative needs to achieve. And on top of that, most of the main characters are involved, so it doesn't really feel like the story is taking a back seat at all. We'll go golfing and try to beat Shishido's score, buy a bunch of expensive clothes from the pawn shop, eat a bunch of food at a local place, grab some hostesses and throw cash all over town, and shoot some pool at the bar. I should note that this is the first game to have pool since Kiwami. It was not present in Yakuza 6, Kiwami 2, or Like a Dragon, so it's actually nice seeing this minigame come back. Though it was never one that I particularly focused on in the older games, now that it is back, I actually did give it a try, and it's pretty fun. Heading back to Akame's after our night on the town, Kiryu gets word the next morning that Nishitani has left the castle. The Kijin clan have stormed the cabaret club looking for Kiryu, so we head over there and start busting heads. We have a huge fight with a bunch of the Kijin clan thugs, but Nishitani isn't here. Kiryu feels the need to pay the club back for the disturbance, since he was the one that caused a scene here last night. Hanawa steps in during this conversation and chastises Kiryu outside for making such a scene the night before. Part of me wishes they would have just completely went the other way with Kiryu's identity and leaned into the glasses. They should have just went Superman rules. When Kiryu puts on the glasses, no one recognizes him. At least that wouldn't have forced them to try and justify him doing certain things within the story. It just feels like they set up the rules and then find difficulty trying to work around those rules. Hanawa gives Kiryu some advice here about drawing out Nishitani. He tells Kiryu to try and focus on what he values most. This strikes Kiryu and gets him to think of a new plan, taking away the castle. Since Nishitani is off the boat, it'll be a lot easier to take over the castle by force. Tsuruno is rightly worried because he doesn't want a war between the Watase and the Kijin, so Kiryu says, just wear masks or something. Kiryu decides that if he has to, he'll do it alone, and we have to head to the castle for a big showdown. We have a massive battle with the Watase men at our backs, and Kiryu takes control of the ship. They decide to send a message to Nishitani that he'll lose the ship if he keeps hiding from them. We then see a news report that the ship has been sighted by the Coast Guard. This was only brief though, because the ship disappeared after an hour. This should serve as a good warning to Nishitani that they can get rid of his castle at any time. Nishitani quickly calls Tsuruno and the Watase man plays dumb, acting like he isn't standing directly behind Kiryu right now. The goal is to take Nishitani down before he can figure out that Tsuruno is involved and start an all-out war with the Kijin clan. Finally, Nishitani is provoked and tells Kiryu to come meet him in Sotenbori and his captain will pick him up. Before leaving the castle, we get a larger introduction to the Four Kings storyline at the center of the Coliseum minigame. We have a boss battle with the first of these kings, the clown Dan Brody. Kiryu then meets with the Kijin clan outside of the golf center, who of course arrive with weapons and strength. They don't want Kiryu to meet Nishitani because they want to protect him. Shishido arrives in his mask to help us out. He knows where Nishitani is hiding, but we have to take out the grunts first. Another problem with Gaiden's story starts to crop up here, and that's its villain issue. I won't say that the villains in the game are bad, but it's that they aren't properly built up. We don't see much active bad from Nishitani until this point in the game. Sure, we hear about the fact that he's bad. Tsuruno tells us that he could prevent the dissolution from happening. He tells us that he would seek out and assassinate the Tojo clan top brass if he was around for the ceremony. And he runs this massive castle built off the backs of indebted gamblers. But we don't get much actual time with him. We get one big fight and then spend most of our other time trying to separate him from his central location. So in this scene, Gaiden uses Shishido to tell us about how much of a bad guy Nishitani is before we go fight him, so that we have good motivation to want to beat him up. Nishitani was a member of the Jingwan Mafia, but he covered up his past and now tries to hide it. Shishido expects that he harbors a specific grudge against Kiryu because Kiryu has gone up against the Jingwan in the past. Because of this, he would hunt Kiryu over and over again. And that's kind of the story with Nishitani as a whole. A reference to the Jingwan Mafia is used to make Nishitani seem like a more threatening villain than he is. Even his name is referenced to Homare Nishitani from Yakuza 0. The two arrive at the Kijin clan hideout. With the Patriarch's office located on the top floor, we of course need to move through this building and take everyone out that stands in our way. On the way upstairs, the building starts to burn on the orders of the Watase family. Nishitani immediately recognizes Shishido. Kiryu takes off his glasses at Nishitani's request, and the two face off in a one-on-one battle. This is another pretty great fight with Nishitani, especially with the backdrop of the burning building. Shishido just standing behind, watching from afar. I really like how Nishitani gets kicked into the flames and then jumps out with a knife. After we beat him down, Kiryu wants to take him with them, but when Kiryu goes to open the door, he turns around to Shishido brutally stabbing the patriarch in the chest. He claims that this makes everything easier, and that Tsuruno knew this was going to happen. The two escape the building and meet the man outside. Kiryu confronts him about planning to kill Nishitani. Tsuruno tells a story about a kid in his family that tried to leave years ago.
俺の射程で組から逃げた若いのがおりましてな。賊上がりでまだ20歳くらいのやんちゃ坊主でした。組を無断で抜けるんは確かに重罪や。簡単に許してたら他に示しがつかん。けど相手はガキや。じーっと探すふりだけして俺は見逃すつもりやった。
何があった？
俺が放免したそのガキを西谷はけじめつけなあかん言うてわざわざ見つけ出した。よその組のことやっちゅうのにどっから聞きつけたんか。多分うちの親父にええ格好したかったんやろ。俺が見逃すつもりなんもみんなお見通しやった。で知らせを聞いて俺が駆けつけた時にはもう生爪剥がしたり鼻を削いだり刺した腹の傷いちいちひであぶって。
Tsuruno had to put him out of his misery in the end. Shishido says that Nishitani got off too easy with the death he was gifted. Kiryu is, of course, upset about the fact that he was just tricked into basically handing the murder off to the Watase. This whole scene does a really good job, though, at making the characters reflect on the nature of the Yakuza. It makes them further realize that they need the dissolution. Even they recognize that they shouldn't exist at this point. Before this scene ends, though, we see a blood spot on the floor, noting that Nishitani has clearly survived and escaped. This begins the final chapter, The Man Who Erased His Name. Kiryu arrives back at the Daidoji hideout, upset and annoyed that he was deceived. He tries to vent this to the Daidoji, but they tell him that he is literally the only person that didn't want this. Kiryu tries to accept this as a necessary evil, a death that needed to happen to save tons of people with the dissolution. Hanawa tells Kiryu to leave Sotenbori and wait for Watase to be released. Since Nishitani is out of the picture, there's nothing holding them back from the dissolution now. Kiryu then returns to the temple, and we get this weird time skip interlude that fills us in on the events of Yakuza 7. We jump to the night before Watase is released from prison as the family is preparing for their patriarch's return. And then we see this grunt of the Watase family basically say that Nishitani owns him because he, quote, broke him and, quote, rode his ass, alluding to something pretty nasty. Shishido barely reacts to this, only telling him that Nishitani taking a liking to him was an honor, which seems like an inappropriate reaction to these statements. This is far more overt in the Japanese version of the game, where this man literally states that Shishido was assaulted by Nishitani. If anything, the English translation seems to downplay this fact, and it would make sense that Shishido is just trying to shrug it off, but the game doesn't really paint it in this way or call attention to it. It's a much more subtle fact that feels like it's only there if you're really looking for it. Tsuruno and Shishido are nervous about tomorrow's events. Hanawa visits Kiryu at the temple to check up on him. Hanawa basically fills him in on Aoki taking the chair and the general setup for Yakuza 7's finale. He also thanks Kiryu for saving him and helping out the Daidoji. He promises Kiryu a reward when this is all over, maybe even a vacation where he can be off the hook for a while. Kiryu says that he always wanted to go to Hawaii, recalling something that Yumi said all those years ago. There was a church that she always wanted to visit, and Kiryu would like to take her ring there. Kiryu claims that he doesn't want anything from the Daidoji, but Hanawa knows that this is false. The only thing that Kiryu wants is something they can't give him, a reunion with his family. We can head back to Akame's place at this point where Tsuruno is waiting for us. The two plan to meet tomorrow at a construction site. They'll pick up Watase, get him suited up, and then head to the meeting to dissolve the Yakuza. Tsuruno then apologizes profusely for tricking Kiryu about Nishitani. He wants forgiveness from Kiryu, in which he eventually relents. He also tells Kiryu that some intruders showed up at the Omi recently, one of them being Ichiban Kasuga. Kiryu says that he had heard of him, but they weren't in the same prison. He tells Kiryu about Arakawa shooting him and more Yakuza 7 fill-in information. Kiryu is then told to rest up before tomorrow. We show up at the construction site, Tsuruno and Shishido already having arrived. Watase shows up in a taxi and he thanks Kiryu for being there. He basically immediately says that he knew Kiryu wasn't dead the whole time. Kiryu says that it fooled everyone but him, but this game does not make that apparent because it seems like everyone knows Kiryu is alive. Kiryu and Watase get caught up. They discuss the dissolution a bunch, and then Shishido starts filming them. Tsuruno tries to stop him, but he keeps going, chastising Watase for supposedly betraying his family. Shishido suddenly reveals himself to be the traitor. If he shows this video to anyone in the Omi, they'll have it out for Watase, and Shishido will be made out to be a hero. He plans to take over the Watase family himself. He wants to take this opportunity to get a step up in the world. The group was worried about Nishitani, but they should have realized they had a traitor in their midst the whole time. Nishitani then shows up, revealing himself to be alive. His eye is bandaged, even though he was repeatedly stabbed in the chest, or, well, I guess he wasn't, as we're about to learn. He also says when he sees the whole group, "You're shittier than dog shit," which I have to assume is just some translation issue, because what the hell? The group is shocked that Nishitani is still alive. Shishido reveals that he was actually using a fake toy knife that squirted blood, so why is the bandage there at all? Shishido is sick of being ordered around by Tsuruno and champions himself as the reason that he clawed his way out of the slums. He decided to ally himself with Nishitani and the Kijin clan so that he would have power on his side when he took over the Omi. Tsuruno, Watase, and Kiryu are now standing against the Watase and Kijin clan united. This means that we get a big battle against two armies in the construction site. Before this happens, Kiryu correctly deduces the risk that Shishido is taking. If they're beaten by Kiryu here, then Shishido has to start all over and build himself back up from nothing. We beat down the thugs, and halfway through our battle, Kiryu grapples up to a higher area of the construction site to fight with Nishitani. I didn't feel like this fight was that good, mostly because it felt like it detracted from the larger action taking place on the ground. Nishitani is kicked from the roof, and Kiryu steps back in to finish off Shishido. Kiryu thanks him for the warm-up and knocks him off the construction site when he tries to attack him. Watase breaks the phone with the video of him to get rid of any remaining evidence. Nishitani tries to stab Tsuruno, but Watase steps in first and gets the knife. Hanawa luckily drives in at the last second and hits Nishitani with his car. Akame is with him and pulls out a suit for Kiryu, while Tsuruno has one for Watase. They clean up Watase to head to the dissolution meeting, even though he was just stabbed in the gut. The show must go on. They chain Nishitani up so that he can't interrupt the ceremonies, and Kiryu thanks Akame for all she's done. The group then finally heads to the meeting in a limousine. They properly discuss the severity of the thing that they're about to do. The fact that this will be probably the largest moment in the history of the Yakuza, its end. The group arrives and heads inside. Hanawa tells Kiryu to come back in one piece, and the dissolution scene carries out as usual. There's some changes here with this scene being shifted to a bit more from Kiryu's perspective, but it's mostly the same scene that we witness in Yakuza 7. Watase declares the dissolution, as does Daigo. Kiryu steps in to save Watase and makes his grand reveal. The whole line from Watase about Kiryu being just some hired muscle now holds a lot more weight. We then help the group fend off the angered Yakuza members. Kiryu heads out into the hallway to deal with some other people in the way, and the group leaves Kasuga lying on the floor to finish his story in Yakuza 7. Majima suggests that they all go out for a drink to celebrate, and it's actually pretty awesome to see everyone together like this again, even if it's just for a moment. Kiryu, of course, declines the drink and denies that he's even Kiryu until the very end. But one thing still stands in their way. Shishido arrives wielding a massive sword. He isn't ready to go down that easily. Majima stops him from attacking the group and even puts a dagger through his hand. Saejima steps in to help, but Shishido rallies what's left of the Omi alliance to fight beside him in this coup. Like a total badass, he pulls the dagger out of his hand, and it's clear we're gonna have to fight him. These Yakuza reveal their tattoos just like old times. Appropriately, we're going to get a good old-fashioned showdown to cap this entry off. Kiryu knows that Shishido won't back down that easily, that he's old school. He speaks a different language. He wields a different tongue, one that Kiryu is fluent in. We fight alongside Majima, Saejima, and Daigo for this fight as we thin the herd of battered and displaced Omi members. But this isn't the end, because Shishido calls Kiryu inside for a good old one-on-one. Shishido reflects on the power that this room holds, that the position of chairman holds, the power that it would give him. He thinks Kiryu is different than him, because once again, based on all outside analysis, Kiryu does not care about this power. He didn't want to be chairman even when he had to be, but Kiryu argues that they're actually very similar.
てめえより強い奴がいると聞けば喧嘩して倒したくなる自分が一番強いということを証明して勝ち誇りたいそんなもんだ
We then get probably the best battle of the game, and the final battle of Like a Dragon Gaiden. We fight Shishido in this throne room as he lobs wide sweeping attacks at us. Kiryu eventually breaks his sword and crashes into the wall, sending both men into the entry room below. We now fight Shishido in a similar style as our first battle with him, large kick attacks and charge moves that we have to dodge. Shishido, of course, finds another sword and kicks Kiryu into the lobby of the building, almost crashing a chandelier on his head. We continue the battle down here with Shishido, who's now all charged up. Kiryu then tries to grab Shishido with his spider wire gadget and is thrown onto the balcony above. The two men take part in their final face-off on the roof outside the building. We beat Shishido into oblivion, and this ends with a head clash, and Kiryu kicking Shishido off of the roof into the entrance below. Hanawa and Akame arrive to pick up the boys and take them back to the city. Shishido is still crawling on the ground, and Yoshimura shows up to pacify him and take him in. Shishido is thrown into the trunk, sentenced to become an agent for the Daidoji until the day he dies. Before the trunk is closed, though, Yoshimura tells him that he'll be with Nishitani, something that brings true terror out of Shishido for obvious reasons. And then we get the final scene of this game, and probably the best segment in the project as a whole. Maybe even one of the best scenes in the series. Kiryu is smoking a cigarette at the temple, one given to him by the monk there. Hanawa arrives and Kiryu assumes he's getting another job. The battle between Kiryu and Kasuga has already taken place, and I'm honestly not sure why that wasn't included in this game, but that's fine. Kiryu downplays his involvement in Ichiban's success, even though he was a direct inspiration for him to keep going on. Hanawa feels indebted to Kiryu, so he decides to give him a reward. For a while now, they've had a camera set up at Kiryu's grave in Okinawa. On the anniversary of his death, the kids from Morning Glory visit his grave. They eventually realized they were being monitored by a camera, and Taichi and Ayako went to investigate. They quickly realize that it's pointed at Kiryu's grave. Apparently, the kids all think that Kiryu is still alive and that he had to go away to protect them. So the two kids decide to speak into the camera, sending a message to Kiryu. They tell him that they're all doing great. Taiichi became a firefighter, working off the inspiration that Kiryu taught him as a child. Ayako works at an office nearby. Koji has a job. Ryona is in the fashion industry. Eri wants to work with kids, and Izumi became an animal groomer. Mitsuo does freelance work, and Shiro's in school majoring in science. Taiichi says that Kiryu must have a lot going on because if he was alive, he would obviously come see them. They realize he must just be too busy. Kiryu is sobbing while the kids are delivering this update to him, covering the screen in tears. The kids end the message by saying that they'll be back tomorrow to talk to the camera and they'll drop off a gift for him. Of course, the Daidoji had to remove the camera after this message was left. The kids couldn't catch on, and Kiryu understands. This obviously is a difficult moment for Kiryu. He spent around 4 years here in this temple, mostly by himself. The bulk of his days seemed to be spent meditating, reflecting on the past, and wishing for a more fulfilling life. A man trapped by his duty, his own purpose, trapped between the thing that he wants, his true family, and their safety. It's a tired, bleak existence, and everything that Kiryu does in this game is for them. Well, not literally everything, but he is constantly bound to the Daidoji because he knows that he can't sacrifice the safety of the orphanage. He can't put the kids in danger. So when he receives this message, this one-way window into their lives, it breaks him, and he tells Hanawa that he's grateful for it, even though Hanawa himself wonders if he only made things worse by keeping him in the loop. The Daidoji did return when taking down the cameras and found the gift that was left for Kiryu. It was a picture left in a tube. The agent had to take a picture and place the image back in the tube so the kids didn't realize it was disturbed. It's a drawing by Haruto of his family, with Kiryu dead center. This causes Kiryu to break even more as he compliments Haruto's drawing, as if he can hear him all these miles away.
真ん中にいるのがあなたでしょうか。
うまい絵だな、ハルト。見ろよ。4歳ってのはもう字が書けんのか。
Kiryu starts to feel bad for himself at this moment. These kids are doing fine without him, and he leads this existence at the temple alone. He needed them more than they needed him. The monk quickly pushes back on this thinking, telling Kiryu that he has clearly affected these kids' lives, and it's true. Kiryu's influence is the reason that they've all stood on their own 2 feet for this long. His presence and his lessons while he took care of them affected their lives. Kiryu was a hero to them. It doesn't make him feel much better, but the monk tells him that their superiors have approved Kiryu for a vacation, one with no time limit. Kiryu has to remain dead though. He's not allowed to reveal himself. He decides to leave at this point. He means to go to Hawaii, but he's saving that for last. The monk and the Daidoji boss discuss Kiryu and make sure to keep him as a friend to the faction. Hanawa gives Kiryu his last goodbye. They are friends, but Hanawa doesn't want to admit it because he's his handler. Kiryu is given new credentials and ordered to go by the name Taiichi Suzuki. If you remember, this was the name that Kiryu used in Yakuza 5, but almost no one knows about that. Hanawa reveals at this point that he met Kiryu when he went by Suzuki, but he doesn't explicitly reveal who he is. A lot of people have theorized that he's Morinaga from that game, but he also could have just been a random passenger, I guess. Hanawa tells Kiryu to take care of himself, and Kiryu looks back at the temple for one last goodbye. In the post-credit scene, we see Kiryu 3 years later in Hawaii at the church that he talked about earlier. The scene fades out as he lays Yumi's ring on the altar. This marks the end of Like a Dragon Gaiden. And like I said, This game sticks the landing. I have no qualms with this final scene. This is a beautiful moment for Kiryu, finally catching up on the kids that he's taken care of, finally able to be let off the leash. It's a moment of freedom and a moment of deep sadness for the time that he has lost. It's always hard to see a character like Kiryu get emotional. He's a strong man, one that's rarely let his emotions take hold. He may get angry, he may get sad, but there are few moments where he actually lets out a tear. So when it happens, it's nearly destructive. The fact of the matter is, though, Gaiden really only reaches this height once we get to the last hour or so of the game. It's definitely a Yakuza game that gets better as it goes on, but it has a really rough start. Despite that, outside of the ending, there are some things that I really enjoyed about the game. I like Shishido's character, for example. I think he had an interesting dynamic with Kiryu. Kiryu hasn't exactly had his life handed to him. He has had to work for everything that he's had. He's got the things he's achieved through strict morality, standing up for what is right, a persistent good pushing through in the face of evil. But Kiryu never wanted power or fortune. He only does these things because he believes it's what's right. Shishido misinterprets this as a disrespect for the things that he has gotten, and he ends up hating Kiryu for this. It's not as simple as jealousy, it goes even further than that. It's not that Kiryu has the things that he wants, it's that Kiryu has already had the things that he wants, and he's tossed them to the side like they mean nothing. Shishido had to work from the bottom and earn the place he's at now, but he still wants more. That ambition cripples him in the end, and taking the ultimate risk earns him a spot directly back at the bottom. Kiryu still respects him for his old ways, though. All of the people involved with the dissolution generally understand that people would be upset, but this is the only way. I really enjoyed Hanawa's character as well, especially his relationship with Kiryu. Even though his reasons seem contrary at certain points, he is tasked with being Kiryu's handler, and it's important to keep that relationship very plain. A handler isn't supposed to get too close to their agents. The agents are meant to be tools, meant to be controlled. But Kiryu saves Hanawa's life, and not only that, but once he explains his reasons for doing so, Hanawa has nothing but respect for the man. After this, you can clearly tell it becomes hard to keep that distant relationship. He shows this by often telling Kiryu to come back in one piece and generally worrying for his safety. We can't theorize too much on Hanawa unless we truly know his previous identity, but it sort of goes the same way from Kiryu's perspective. Kiryu immediately respects the man when he sees him brush off his own death just to make sure others are all right, or that the goal is served. And Kiryu is willing to risk his own safety for this man's survival. It's a shred of the things that Kiryu used to fight for. It's a diet version of the things that Kiryu used to have, the relationships and dynamics he used to take part in before the Daidoji, before the leash. So he clings to that because it's the only thing he has in this new life. Nishitani isn't my favorite character because he never felt all that impactful outside of a few scenes that were towards the end of the game. We aren't even briefed on him too much until past the halfway point, and then suddenly he's a massive villain. Once we reached the finale, I just couldn't care too much about him anymore. It feels like he was really only meant to be there so that he could be thrown aside for Shishido. Yoshimura is in a similar boat, a villain that causes havoc in the first half, but then doesn't fill that role or appear in general for most of the rest of the game. And a lot of these issues are pacing problems, ones that wouldn't be an issue if you had, double or triple the amount of time to build them across a larger game. But Gaiden's story really just feels a bit rushed in most places. And part of this is due to the fact that the game only had a 6-month development. RGG is prolific, sure, but you can definitely feel that lack of time in this game. It was originally planned to be a DLC for either Infinite Wealth or Like a Dragon, or an interlude, but not a full game. And I don't really think it needed to be a full game, to be honest. What we do get here isn't really necessary to the overall story. We didn't need to know what happened to Kiryu in this downtime. The scene with him watching the kids at Morning Glory was nice, but that could have easily been part of Yakuza 8. His relationship with Hanawa was built up here as well, but again, we didn't need an entirely separate game for that. And again, it's been said many times in the past, but it's just another way that the series manages to cheapen Yakuza 6's ending. That game's ending no longer feels as impactful because we know that it isn't truly a goodbye to Kiryu in the end. He does return many times after that. It's still nice that we have it, sure, and like I said, I don't think this is a bad game. I'm mostly of the opinion that there are no truly bad Yakuza games. Saying that this game is the most disappointing Yakuza game is like saying it's the worst dish at a 5-star restaurant. It's still a dish at a 5-star restaurant. I definitely don't hate the game, it just wasn't really for me. I do think that RGG should continue to pursue the brawler side games, because I think it's important that the series continue to include this genre, considering it's such an important part of the series' history, and also, I love playing them. But I guess I would just prefer that the games are more like Judgment, a full-fledged entry in its own right with distinct characters and a unique storyline. And listen, I know a lot of people out there love this entry. Don't let the things that got in my way stop you from liking the game. Despite my complaints, Like a Dragon Gaiden was very well received by fans and critics alike. The game currently has a 78 on Metacritic on the critic side and an 8.3 on the audience side. Gaiden sold well too. While we don't have a ton of exact sales numbers, Yokoyama said that the game generated twice the amount of sales than they expected. The Steam release generated $1 million in revenue within the first 3 days on Steam alone. I would assume the game's popularity was due to the fact that it was the first game that saw players controlling Kiryu since the release of Yakuza Kiwami 2 in 2017, and Infinite Wealth hadn't released yet. Of course, that game would see players controlling both Kiryu and Ichiban, and would be the largest game that the series had seen thus far. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad.